Well, there we go. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we're live. Let's do this. Hi, everybody. It's our buddy Christopher. Christoph. I don't know. There you go. Hi, buddy. Good to see you. Oh God. It's 11:40. We're a little late. It's my fault. Sorry about that, everybody. But we did it. We got the old thing moving. The nice thing about these live streams is we can just do them whenever the heck we want. Like it's fine. The long tail is what matters, right? Like, whereas I don't know, if you're doing these presentations live, it's sort of very much, you're there and you're in it or you're not, right? It's I don't know. Which one is more work for you there, Ken, as a speaker and a presenter?
Which is what? Sorry?
Which one's more work? Like, which one brings you more satisfaction at a job well done? Is it the long tail sort of benefit of a book or something that is durable and that endures beyond the time in which it's being conducted? Or is it the sort of on the spur of the moment, hopefully recorded, but still very much on the spur of the moment, like presentation that you're doing live with no wires?
That's a great question. I don't know if I thought through that enough. What I would say, is I like variety. So I like all of it to a certain extent, and kind of sometimes depends on the ability to focus. There's certainly like huge value and wins out of any one of those when you know that it's changed or added to someone's life, that it has added value. So it really is, it doesn't matter as long as there's some feedback, and that feedback comes back as being meaningful to somebody, and then in that moment it's like the best feeling ever.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm told. Nobody's ever told me that.
No one ever gives you that positive. You do great, Josh. Everybody loves you, man. For sure.
But I'm told that's what I'm told that feels really quite nice. So thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I agree. That would be it's very lucky that I think you can go on stage. I think that's, for me, that's more, I don't know. Like, you know how Batman, you ever see these would-be competitions between like Batman versus Spider-Man or Batman versus Superman or whatever, and the question is who would like win, and the answer is always, well, Batman, but with prep time, right? Like, dropped Batman right in the middle of an arena against Superman, and he's got nothing. He's just wearing his Bruce Wayne suit and stuff. Like, he's gonna lose, right? He can't. But Batman, with a little bit of time to plan, he wins all the time. It doesn't matter who he's fighting, right?
Right.
And I feel like, with a book, you're Batman with prep time. You've got time to make that book perfect, whereas you're running, you gotta like dismount and get off the stage before the next person gets here. And hopefully you didn't screw it up.
Yeah. I think it's a weird thing, right? Like the thing that came to mind is, I don't remember the official story, but paraphrasing quite a bit, you go up and ask for a picture to be drawn, and you get convinced to pay some large amount of money to have this picture drawn of yourself, a portrait of sorts. And they take like 2 minutes to have something amazing, and then at the end you're like, this isn't worth it. Like, I just paid you like a crazy amount of money for what I thought was a brief amount of time. And it's like, well, but I took decades to get to the point where I could do that. Right. So like what makes many of us hopefully adding a lot of value in a short period of time on stage presentation, it really is like the fact that we do this for a living, that we're living it, that we've been doing it for years, and we're able to like stand on the shoulders of giants and then be the shoulders on which others stand on. So it's yeah.
So you're saying a good stage performance is a function of prep time as well.
It is.
And so that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe this will change the way I do my presentations. You're saying I should prepare.
It's a strategy. It's a really good strategy.
New strat unlocked. I'm spending quite
where I think people get in trouble is they have the technical acumen, and that's awesome. And then they just get up on stage and do it. And then the beauty of being on stage per se is like it's what I love about software. It's this beautiful combo of art and science, and you have to have more than just the technical story, the technical description, and the awareness. You actually have to build in a story, something compelling, something interesting, something that draws people's interest. And yeah, it's this interesting combination that makes it amazing. So
this is what I've heard. Yeah, it's
this is what I heard.
Again, this has become a very awkward conversation for me in the last 8 minutes, and I regret everything. No, 100%. It's a performance. You know, it's a performance of art, and it's if it's done well, as you do it, and as our mutual friend Dr. Subramaniam does it, it is something all its own. It's far more than the sum of the components of the parts of the, that go into the conversation. You know, it's just masterfully done. And you mentioned variety, so this is where I've got such a. I mean, your performances are legendary in of themselves, but you're also you're able to scale up and down the abstraction stack with ease in your talks, and so I think that's very hard. I wouldn't say you're like, I'm not saying I'm the specialist. It's not like I just do one thing. So the opposite of that, I don't know what that is, but that's not what I'm saying either. I'm saying you are able to, when you need to, get deep into a topic, and then in the next talk on the next stage have this really, really big sweeping discussion. And so I've seen your ridiculous no fluff just stuff repertoire, like just 500 different talks or something over the years. You know, I mean, I don't even know what your current talk track and sort of repertoire looks like, but it's just you have got such a breadth of topics, and I don't know what keeps you doing that instead of, I don't know, focusing, or like it just okay. Case in point, you have Kubernetes talks, right? You have like how to get certified in Kubernetes in the same breath as like, okay, let's do Agile, and in the same breath, here's microservices and whatever. I mean, just goes all over. It's just sort of, you could say cloud native, maybe. I don't know. I mean, but even there, you've done stuff on just like app dev. You've done stuff on, testing and all this other stuff as well. And it belies a curious mind,
Yeah. On that topic to some degree, this is to sound weird, but I don't know the cause, but I came to the recent realization, because I've seen the pattern. I've seen it a couple of times where I'm slightly ahead of the curve, and I don't know how I got there, to be honest, other than I have a great circle of friends and some good awareness. But oftentimes I'll start speaking on a topic, and then I'm kind of either done with it, or there's others kicking in and they're doing it, so I find another thing to do. And I realized that I was like a year or two ahead and should have probably just stuck with it. So the two that come immediately to mind, what's the Kotlin. So I think I was talking with Kotlin very early on, and I was even with the co-creator, good friends, and speaking with him all the time. And then I switched out and did a bunch of other things, only to have it like catch fire with Android, and now everybody wants to talk about it to a certain extent. And Kubernetes falls in the same category. I was very early on in container orchestration with Mesos, and then Kubernetes, and now I'm a CNCF committer and a contributor to Kubernetes, and I have lots of things I could talk about in that space. But at some point, I felt like the things that were interesting I talked about, and now people are interested. So maybe I need to.
You were there when it was square. That's the way to do it. Kotlin. So let's talk about that. I also, didn't you do Groovy talks at some point in your life? Or
I did a bunch of Groovy talks, years ago, and then that dovetailed into doing a bunch of things with Gradle, and Spock. I love Spock, man. I just think it's a brilliant test framework. So, and I thought those were the two sweet spots for Groovy. I mean, you could obviously build all kinds of things with it. I don't mean to belittle it at all, but it had some crazy hotspots.
This is the what's that called, the killer app, right? Like Ruby on Rails was the killer app for Ruby. It's the thing that catapulted it into the stratosphere. And porn websites was the killer app for PHP, right? Like it's just porn and viruses. And then what was I guess jQuery was the thing that activated like JavaScript, I guess, maybe. I don't know. I mean, what was the thing where suddenly it wasn't unreasonable to expect that people in the organization knew it, like it just sort of, so for JavaScript, I think it was, I mean, but do you remember there's like Scriptaculous and MooTools and Dojo and all these other little frameworks in JavaScript in the early 2000s, and then but here comes Ajax in 2004,
That's right.
And suddenly it's like, well, okay, jQuery, I want to be able to just add to this HTML thing, and then you get React and Angular, and then React and all these other things. I don't know. Whatever.
Right.
Very, very sort of big. And then Python, I mean, the AI ML game sort of.
Oh, data science, like it was either R or Python, and Python's definitely the stronger suit of all of that.
Right.
And yeah, it's definitely the killer app. It's well, that and command line. I see a lot of any cloud vendor is going to have a decent library for CLI development in Python. Yeah, so there's been a couple of spaces where Python's really doing really well. Yep.
Really, really good. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of different reasons that these languages take root. And for Groovy, I mean, Grails was huge, but Gradle still huge. I mean, obviously for good reason. It's an amazing piece of tech. And then Spock is, it's like it's a masterpiece. They have a spec in Kotlin, right, which is in the same spirit. Very much, it's gorgeous, but you can't. For when it came and how good it was out of the gate, Spock is truly I'll never forget Spock. Spock is amazing.
Spock's one of the talks that I have with NFJS that Jay, like, I guess based on customer demand, which drives Jay quite a bit. I've been doing that since I started on Spock, which was, I can't even remember, 0.5, whatever the version was. It was a long time ago. And I was even set on writing a book on it, and then just didn't have the time to follow up on it. But yeah, it's still super popular. Still part of many tool chains, including the latest Micronaut by default has it. So you just kind of expect it to be there. What I'm surprised by is and probably my most common use case is Java as the production code with Spock as the testing framework. To me, that's the sweet spot. Like I would all day long. Yeah.
We see people doing that with Spring, and it's in Spring Boot. Like it's not the default configuration, but people do it, and it makes sense. It's a great little experience. And they are two separate source code folders, so it's not even that hard to set up in your build tool.
No, the brilliance there is it's tied in with JUnit. So like any CI or any tooling that already understands JUnit, which is all of them, they just seamless. So yeah,
super good. So super practical, built by people who are trying to get people to production as opposed to trying to enforce a particular worldview
or lock you in. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I love Kotlin. I mean, obviously, so the Spring team, we had a support. We said we support configuring and using Kotlin in 2016 on start.spring.io. So the web service that powers the generation of millions of Spring apps, now has an option for Kotlin as of 2016. We actually added support into Spring Framework in 2017. So there's code in the Spring Framework code base in Kotlin. I'm telling the audience here, obviously. You wrote a book, didn't you? Didn't you and I work on a book together on Spring? Am I imagining it?
I did write some chapters for a Spring book, but I don't remember the details anymore. It's been years and years and years ago.
Was that Spring Recipes?
What's that?
Was that called Spring Recipes?
Yeah, that's right. Years ago. That's a long time ago.
So I worked on the second edition of that. So the guy that wrote it first was this guy in Hong Kong named Gary Mack, who is like, I love him so much. He's a genius. And then they wanted somebody to do the second edition. I took that particular thing and worked on it. And then some amazing people who really should have been there. It would have been even more successful had these amazing people worked on this instead of me in that first cut after Gary.
You're always self-deprecating.
No. I mean, really, I was not qualified to write to work on that book. It was a Hail Mary. It was just a lottery ticket that I won. Because that was so you and Andrew Lombardi and some really was it Andrew. Who else followed on that book that I haven't? It's been 15 years. Let me think about this. Daniel Rubio, of course. Let's see. There's been so many additions now. It's very hard for me to be sure, but whatever. There's just been some amazing people that have worked on these books, adding their wisdom to it, sort of like writing your name in a trunk of a tree over the years. Yeah. Anyway, that's cool. I love that we kind of like The Lighthouse. You ever see that movie, The Lighthouse? Two people
I
filmed.
don't think so.
It was I think it's like Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, or let me see, The Lighthouse.
No, now you have to know. Yeah.
Googling it. Googling.
I think starting back at the origins of Kotlin, there were a number of things happening at the same time, right? And that's we started seeing an uptick in Scala roughly the same time as Kotlin was the origins of Go. And I had a bunch of friends who were all over Scala. They were huge fans, and I just always took Scala to be academic. It's not to say you can't write production systems. It's challenging. It's challenging because everything requires an upgrade. You got to rebuild everything. Like it's for each version. It's crazy. There's no backward compatibility. So when Go and Kotlin came out, I thought, here it's backed by a company that has strong economic interest in its success, in adding value to their end delivery, right? And when you have that, the likelihood of success is higher. I'm not saying it's definite, but it's definitely higher. And so I just always thought that Go and Kotlin both would do extremely well, and they have. Of course, they had to, as you articulated, they had to find their niche and their killer app. But and they have, and now you're starting to see even more interest. All you need, right, is that nucleus and kind of the start of it, and then people start to look for other options. So it's great.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, that's yeah. I see, Crystal.
The Lake House was the movie. That's where you and I. That's where two people who existed in different years somehow. It was a weird romance movie. Somehow they fell in love across different times. They weren't in the same place, but they lived in the same house, but in different generations or whatever. And they knew each other through this.
Oh, now I got another thing to watch. I don't know about.
It was trippy, but it's also a kind of movie. So maybe bring a popcorn or something. Anyway.
It sounds like trying to entertain the nerds along with their spouses.
I don't know. I mean,
comedy with time travel.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a it's a nice movie, but they leave each other letters in the mailbox, and somehow this mailbox transports across time or something. I don't know, whatever. It's weird. So and I feel like that's same. We both worked in this book, but different times. We're both adding to the stream of that book. So I couldn't agree more with you about the Scala thing. Scala, I mean, still objectively, it is the most powerful language on the JVM. It's just that they had their own Python 2 to 3 moment, which is actually Scala 2 to 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they did that, it broke everything, and but it's a gorgeous. I mean, if you like Kotlin, there's no reason you wouldn't love Scala, because Scala has Kotlin and then a lot more, right?
This is years ago, but I used to call Kotlin Scala minus.
Yeah. And that's not a slight. That could be a feature, Sometimes
exactly. It takes the crazy out of it and adds in some really great benefits. Yeah,
right.
There's huge value in being extremely. Now, some of that came into Java, but when you're getting into an API, the return type of a thing, for instance,
right?
There's a huge difference between a thing is always a thing that comes back, or it could be null. And so to be expressive around the optionality of something, that is very, very articulate, right? Like you can really express something in a very strong way. Hey.
Yeah, I mean,
Scala
was they didn't have the nullability, did they? Did they have? I think Kotlin really came out with the nullability annotations first, right?
Yeah, I believe that's true. It was quickly, reasonably followed by. I actually can't remember now the version of Java that came out with optionalities to it, but there's still more expression that's possible in Kotlin, regardless. So it's
I think nullability was a thing. It's one of the very few things we can say that Kotlin had before Scala.
Yeah,
I believe
that's true.
But I'm not even sure. I don't even know because I haven't used Scala in a decade. But either way, I agree with you. Kotlin has done a really good job of distilling the essence of what people are trying to do and taking from the different sources the things that it wants, including Groovy, including Java, including Scala, including C# and TypeScript, and really good job of just homogenizing, integrating these really disparate sort of use cases with a.
I think if I had a big issue with Scala, I mean, we could talk on and on about it, but I think my biggest issue with Scala is that, with software development, it's all about rules. It's all about knowing the rules and knowing how to express those rules, and then, unintended consequences of rule misalignment and things like that. So, like, the idea that an import will, just simply on collections, an import will change the kind of collection that you have that would make it concurrent or not.
Right.
There's so much you had to keep in your mind when you're looking at a really reasonably sizable file. You have to go all the way to the top and go, oh, what was imported, or was it imported or not? And then reason about the thing that's there. The things you have to connect in your mind to know where you're at from a rule set standpoint is just really challenging. So it makes it hard to maintain or to grok in the moment. And I'd say, this is one of the things I like about Clojure. Clojure, while people get all hung up about the parentheses, the rule set is so insanely small. It's easy to reason about. It's super easy.
I mean, well, so if you're doing pure play Lisp, I mean, by the way, okay, there's so many things to go with on that, so many threads to tug on. First, what do you think of extension functions? Are they more or less magic compared to implicits in your mind?
I mean, there's always a pro and a con, right? So I can see places where it makes a whole lot of sense and makes life easier. This would be the topic is somewhat close to generics. Generics has a way of making things less readable, and to a certain extent, what I was talking about was maintainability and readability and conception or cognitive load. So when you get into that space, right, sometimes, let's simplify it greatly. Go into just the dynamic language we started with Groovy. You could be insanely dynamic at the API layer. You could. That's a terrible idea. That's the place in which you want to be as expressive as possible.
Right.
So you would kind of go against the nature of the language. Not that you really are, but that there's, if you're a true diehard, dynamic, author, you may be driving yourself to doing things that might be dynamically better, have more flexibility. But that flexibility comes with a cost. And so sometimes you absolutely want to go that way and there's value to it. And sometimes you don't. And so that's where it takes a true expert to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish and when it's appropriate to go one way or the other. And that said, you can still have two experts that disagree. So it's a reasonable world we live in.
That's Postel's law. I just had to Google that. Postel's law, or the robustness principle, right? Be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send, is formulated by John Postel, one of the early pioneers of the internet. I'm reading from the AI. It's formulated by John Postel, one of the early pioneers of the internet, and was originally applied to TCP network protocol implementation. The idea is that a program should be flexible in what it accepts as input, meaning it should accept various formats and try to handle unexpected inputs gracefully, but be conservative in what it outputs, meaning it should strictly conform to specifications when sending data to other systems. And right. If you have a language that is loosey-goosey with types, that's going to be an uphill battle when you're trying to nail down the specifics of the shape of your API.
I think it's who was that? They were using Ruby on Rails effort. was it Twitter? I think it was Twitter.
Yeah.
They were on the monorail and they moved out to microservices with Java, blah blah blah. But and then with Mesos actually. But the point is the claim at that time was that a software of that size, you could never scale a dynamic language. Well, I don't believe that, but but they did,
Oh, yeah.
and so it shows a lack of true understanding. I mean, that was somebody who went probably off the rails with being dynamic, and there's a place for it, and there's value to it, and it makes things a lot better. But you got to know when to apply it.
I saw there's this guy named Anton Putra or something like that. Forgive me if I'm butchering his name. He did a Ruby versus Node comparison the other day. Anton Putra, he's a YouTuber.
Okay.
Let me see. So he did this like 4 days ago, and I saw this, and because he had done a video before where he compared Ruby on Rails to Node, and yeah, they put it nicely. Rails got dumped, just embarrassing. But with Ruby, just straight Ruby and like some other framework,
pretty cool language.
It scales. It scales really. It ran circles around Node at some point in this thing. Let me see. So if you look at the graph here, Ruby in this. There's a graph here where after 23 minutes or something like that, Ruby has 75.3 thousand requests a second, whereas Node is only doing 44, and it flattens out at that point too. So like Ruby just kept scaling. It kept on getting faster and faster for a lot longer.
The challenge you run into, especially if you do benchmarking type comparisons, is you really have to design for the language itself, and you could ruin that scalability for sure, right? If you were so inclined, you can make something look better or worse than another thing just based on how you apply it.
Yep. So that's why. So he got Rails out of the picture and suddenly, and just used a lightweight framework, sort of like what you would do in Node, and suddenly the language itself. So to your point earlier about Twitter, could they scale Ruby? Absolutely, right? No doubt. It's just maybe it's not about scalability in terms of their ability to handle network requests, and more about the ability to scale the team. The people working on the code base have to have a. Speaking of that, by the way, do you like Clojure? I love Clojure, right? Like Lisp is Lisp is Lisp. There's no classes, there's no objects, there's no other. It's just lists of lists, and it's the easiest parser in the world to write, right? Anybody can write a Lisp parser in an afternoon if they want to, Okay, we got some comments here. Scala is academic. That's why I love Kotlin. True. But I think Scala is super valuable because it proves out some of the concepts that we can then integrate into production.
Yeah, I can align on that. I think there's room for languages to kind of go crazy and learn, discover, and then get adopted in. So that you see that in the Linux world, right, where you kind of have these oddball branches, but then something really amazing comes out of it, and you introduce it into the kernel. So I could totally see the value in that.
Yeah.
I still see a lot of Scala still, and Spark, and some other applications for which you don't have once binary necessarily. You're okay with like recompiling each time you need to go, kind of thing. So there are places for it for sure. But I can align on what you said.
I'm a big fan. Although they're having the same issue there, I think, with Spark users for years. It took a lot longer to update because of the 2 to 3 language jump, Which happened, by the way. And so I asked the AI, and you can't lie in AI.
No.
Awesome.
You can hallucinate, but you can't lie.
Yeah. So anyway, I asked the AI, what modern language has the best backwards compatibility story? And it was Java. It was number one, not even close. It didn't, like, in terms of what language you can take to the bank and build on today and have it still do the right thing 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Java, and it's got a freaking great record. It's not perfect, but it's really, really good. Which brings us to this question.
Yeah.
What's your take on many large companies still being on Java 8, Java 11, but not using Java 11 features? And my take, I'll go first, is Java 11, there's Java 24 in 4 months. What are you doing in Java? I mean, when Java 24 comes out, it'll be 3 times better than Java 8 mathematically, right? Like Java 11 is not the thing I would start at. I would stop
No,
at.
but the pain that's being expressed is real. So first, we can empathize with. Yeah, I hear you. It's real. There are still plenty of companies on the 8, for sure, and it's frustrating.
Don't know. It's I mean, of all the languages that make this kind of jump as easy as possible. Oh, so good. I mean,
yeah, even with Java's backward compatibility story, which I'm aligned with you. Like so being friends, or at least good acquaintances with Brian Getz, who's chief architect of Java language. Yep. His like the number of times that I've been in his presence where he's talked about like this need to stay backward compatible, it's like the main thing on his mind, right? Like it's a big deal. So, with that said, the jumps that we're talking about going into 11, there were huge things just ripped out of the JDK. So it's not the language necessarily itself; it's the JDK. But we pulled out things that were
the XML stuff, maybe
XML oriented, and a variety of things that were in the Jakarta space. And
but that's the Jakarta. So that I get. So people who are moving from Spring Boot 2 to 3, they had to deal with the new baseline being Java 17. Not such a big deal, but concurrent with that, they had to do the worst find and replace session of their life, replace everything that was Java stock, whatever.
That's right. Yeah, but that brings us back to like the Scala thing, right? Like to do this jump, I have to recompile everything. So now it's interconnected in some degree, and there is a little bit of pain there. I agree that it's actually a reasonably easy thing to do. It's a tedious thing to do, and
but it's doable. It's not impossible. Well, it's
the problem that any large company with a large enough code base, it's a problem to pay off your tech debt, and if the tech debt is like insurmountable, and you still have new features to get out, prioritizing those things is really problematic. But then you're kind of stuck. So, like to in part, answer that question, like it's not just about better readability, and there's so many great things about the later versions of Java. Java 21 is excellent. Like there's so many great things about it. But at some point, we could get into security and the fact that we're going to need updates on, and if you want those updates, they're going to be on the latest and greatest. And like, you don't want to fall too far behind. And frankly, it worries me, some of these large companies, because they're going to be left with people who don't care. They're willing to maintain, and they're not sharpening their skills. And so that's not the world that you want to be in. And so it causes cascading challenges, organizationally.
And it's also if frustrating. Like, look, if you're using Spring, which statistically, if you're doing something on the server side, you are, then you also need to be moving that forward. And if you're not, you're like,
that's that cascading effect, right? Like that's exactly right. You want the newer things with Spring, and there's at some point you gotta move forward.
Yeah, we have.
And if you keep kicking the can, that tech debt has a service debt associated with it, and it's gonna grow. And at some point you're gonna be, well, we should just rewrite this whole thing, and that's gonna be. Anyway, I've seen that story play out a few times.
Oh yeah, like did you ever read who's the guy from? Oh, come on, Fogbugs, Joel Spolsky.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Oh, that's a name I haven't said in a minute. I wonder what they're doing. I haven't looked at Fogbugs. There was a time where, like, Joel on Software was like the blog to read every other week, whatever it was. He's always had. It's stuck with me. He's always had this very sort of strong position on rewriting. Which is don't, because you're destroying years of institutional knowledge that has been baked into the code base. There's little nuances and little concessions to weird idiosyncrasies that are in they're steeped in that every little corner of that code base, that when you throw that out the window because you want a clean design, you disadvantage yourself. That institutional knowledge is value.
I mean, there's I mean, like many things, there's contention there, right? And I can see the value of that argument. I fully acknowledge it. There are times though where there's just too much value in the other side of the story, and that you can imagine something that's not built on Spring, that is Java 6, Java 7, 8, whatever it is,
Oh, God.
and like you're really struggling, and you don't even I can just see the need to rewrite it and to make it more maintainable. And to the problem is will they do it right?
Right.
Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Martin Fowler has, what is it called? He's got this really great chart on it's got a line that kind of does a curve and goes flat, and that's like writing code with no design. And
Right.
then and then there's another curve and it goes the other direction, and it's writing code with design, with the ability to add new features. And in the early stages, there's always huge advantages to looking great, getting stuff done with no design. The
Right.
problem with that is over time, it's every time you touch a thing, you're breaking like 3 other things, and then you're going to spend all your time refactoring because you haven't properly encapsulated, and that's what good design would do.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. So that's the other take I've heard. That's the you just kind of, I think you kind of in a roundabout way just said the same as our friend Bruce Eckel, which is basically, what did he? I mean, it's not just him, but I've heard him say it. I've heard others. Write 3 times, take 1 or whatever. Like cut 3 times, take 1. Like basically you write the same program 3 different times. And
you know what? I haven't written it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I haven't written 3 other times. But I had an interesting experience. This is more than a decade ago for me. I wrote GoGo's in-flight entertainment system for Singapore Airlines. This is their first oceanic entertainment system.
nice.
And I came in initially to do the design. But here's my experience. If you talk to most authors, especially after their first book, what you find is that when they were done, like they were 99% done, for every one that I spoke to who are willing to admit it, they were about 50% done. Like they had to do as much post production as they did in the production set. And
Right.
so, with that in mind, what I decided to do is when I created user stories for this new entertainment system. By the way, I was just architecting there, and they're like, "Hey, would you stay on? We're going to hire, a developer. You can oversee them." And I'm like, "Well, I write code." So, and by the time they hired somebody, I was like, I don't know, 80% done or more. So it was pretty funny. But when I did a story, and I had what I thought was a reasonable solution
Right.
to for acceptance criteria. I then took the equal amount of time that I had just put into it to rewrite it, to truly encapsulate it. And
Right.
what the best part about that story is I had a lady who, when I landed at GoGo, she just came to me. I don't know why she was so bold, but she obviously been bitten way too many times. She's like, "Look, I don't like contractors." It was not a positive experience. She was pregnant and she went off on maternity leave. She came back, and probably one of my favorite moments was she came to me and said, "Ken, this is the most beautiful code." And I was like, "When?" That's one person, so it's not. It's a little bit colloquial, but
That's somebody who had seen the worst and knew the best.
but that's the problem, is that I think a lot of us finish a story, meet its acceptance criteria, and we're done. And what I would say is, did you apply good engineering and design, and maybe do that, because there's good reason and good value to it. And a lot of us are just under so much time pressure that the only thing we're thinking about is, well, I got another story to do, and that's
True.
going to always be true.
I mean, and this is why I think it's really useful to have the architect on team, is to have somebody who's always keeping an eye on not the immediate dull pain of a particular story being solved in the next 2 weeks sprint or whatever, but
Right.
somebody who's keeping an eye on the big picture. And is the scaffolding going to hold? Does the building is it structurally sound? Are we doing things? Are we steering towards a way where the system is going to be easier to change or more difficult? And preserving optionality. Our buddy Brian Simboden says hi. So
Brian, hey Brian. I haven't seen him in a minute. He's one of my favorite people.
Me too. Couldn't agree more. He's on. He responded on Twitter, which for whatever reason is not showing up here in ye old chat. You would think a platform based on text messages.
Did you mean X?
Oh yeah, that one. Sorry.
No, dude, that's me being humorous.
Whatever. You think it'd be easier. Yeah. So I don't know. Another question for you is how do you pronounce the letters S period Q period L period? It's an abbreviation, or maybe there is no period. Maybe it's just a word. I don't know. How do you pronounce that technology? Just for the
Well, a lot of people will spell it out SQL. Some people will pronounce it SQL. Yeah. I got a fun story for you, though. Did you? You know, I'm a pilot, and at one point I flew into San Francisco, and the closest airport was San Carlos. And all airports have a 3 or 4 letter airport code. Do you know what the 3-letter airport code is for San Carlos?
No, really?
It's the air, but I will give it to you that it's the one that Larry Ellison flies in and out of and constantly gets fined for noise abatement issues, right?
Is that actually the SQL? Is that the
code? So I can say that I've literally flown in and out of SQL.
That's awesome. Oh man, I was in Stuttgart, and the airport code there is STR, and of course, you know, they had those string templates in Java as a feature, and I felt really bad because the string templates feature, as it was presented in that preview feature, which has mercifully since been withdrawn. It's not in the new modern Java as a preview feature anymore. That feature was so terrible that I felt bad for the people of Stuttgart. That would have their airport even tenuously linked to it, you know.
Yeah, to this technology, yeah.
Right, yeah. Which I'm sure the Venn diagram is vanishingly small. The intersection of that Venn diagram is vanishingly small between the people that were traumatized by that terrible technology and who are going to fly in and out of Stuttgart. But for those, I think some action was necessary.
Take us back to SQL. Yeah, what did I do? I'm sure there's some humor there that I missed. But.
Yeah. I don't know. So okay, you're a pilot. By the way, I haven't even introduced you this whole time. We've been talking, and it's my fault. You're Ken Sipe. I've known you for I don't know, 15 years. You poor bastard. I don't know. I've got you listed as an engineer, CTO, teacher, pilot. I could have mentioned book author. Maybe you have a new diss track album that I've missed or something, and which is gonna get a Grammy. I don't know. What do you do? Like, what do you? How do you introduce yourself these days?
Oh, yeah, I do all those things. Software engineer. I've been in software architecture forever. I used to actually was one of the first 10 people for Rational who didn't work for Rational, but used to teach ROP, UML, Rose, Rational Rose, in the late 90s. And I usually say, oh, I'm sorry, I was young, I needed the money. But it was a good time, and it set the tone for a lot of things. I've been dolphining in and out of technical leadership, or what might even call an individual contributor role versus leadership. And I still continue to do that. I think it has a lot to do with our earlier question. I like diversity.
Yeah.
And I see value in both. So I'm an architect. I actually lead up a department of enterprise architecture at a fintech company today, and still do a variety of other things.
So I think this is super, like, I feel like it's so easy to breathe in or swim in or traffic in the idea that you too can build a brand new app in 5 minutes using technology X, and it's very easy. And it's very easy to forget that nothing substantive ever gets done in 5 minutes. Like, it's going to be a toy no matter what you're using. And at some point, there's architecture, and where do you see the line between software and architecture? When do they call you in instead of the fire department, for example?
Interesting.
Or actually, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they call you in first, and then they bring in software. And
if they do it well, if they do it right, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, lots of different thoughts there. One, you talked earlier about, like, where do you get your value from, or when are you like feeling great about the outcome?
Right.
Architecture is really hard because especially EA, enterprise architecture for a large organization, like the things that we do, sometimes you don't see the value of until a year later, and it's really decoupled. The effort from the realization oftentimes is very decoupled.
I feel bad for our friend Brian Getz. You mentioned like he's got bets that he started 10 years ago that are just now starting to pay off. Like
yeah. And architecture is really now, I had a moment where Martin Fowler just entered my head, but he would say architecture is the stuff you hope you get right at the beginning, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It depends on what architect you're talking about. There's a variety of different kinds of architects. In my world, the most common roles that I played would be like an application or solution architect, and then an enterprise architect. And they're very, very different. Application architect might go in and prescriptively say, we're going to use Java 21, we're going to use Spring, we're going to default, our web application to Spring MVC, so the MVC pattern. You might get very, very explicit and detailed. But an enterprise architect, it's one of the things I find is people lack an understanding of like what that role is and how to do it well. And the thing that I'm going to backtrack for a second. Most application architects, they come, you don't go to college and then you're an application architect. Almost always you've evolved out of being a developer. And the thing that makes a developer a really great developer is really strongly different than what makes an architect a really great architect. So it's a weird situation in our industry where the thing that you've made a name for yourself, you've done extremely well in one skill set, and they switch you out to this other skill set that's overseeing a little bit, but is very strongly different. Like the need for communication is much greater at the architecture level than it is at the developer level. And so then you become an application architect. As you evolve and you get to be an enterprise architect, if that is the world you live in, again, the skills are really quite different. Your need to dive into different levels of abstraction are greater. And the things that I might have a policy on or a standard for, I can't be prescriptive. I can't. So we can say that we prefer MVC, let's say, as a pattern, but I can't say that everything has to be Java 1 or 21, right? I just can't do that. In fact, I might have a Python over here or a Go over here and a Java over there, and I still have certain patterns that I expect to be dominate our space. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of have to break down applications into, is this core business or is this ancillary? And how I apply certain disciplines would be very different. So if it's core business, I might dive into some really expensive things, like the number of nines you have might be higher, or I might be idempotent and I might have the ability to replay certain failures. And that would be too costly and expensive to apply ubiquitously. I would say, okay, for my non-core business, I'm going to take this extra risk where I'm going to use maybe stateful services, where that may not be the preferred way, but it is easier to maintain. It's easier to reason about, and we will be on fault-tolerant hardware. And so you start I would say at an architectural level, there's a lot of, hey, what's the integration like? Hey, what's our, how do we want to be consistent? And then it gets to the next evolution would be, how do I be consistent within a certain track? And so that track might be like core businesses versus non-core, and you might even break up tracks a little bit more than that. So, and most of the architects that I work with are also very, very good engineers. And I agree with some of the comments that Neil Ford is famous for saying. If you stop touching code, your utility as an architect diminishes quickly. Now he would say you become useless within a week, and I think that's a little bit humorous and probably strong worded, but at some point it's true, right? And the core of it really is that you have to be in a position of understanding consequences. Mm-hmm. And so once you lose that ability to understand the consequences of decisions, then you're causing problems.
I would even argue that I would even say that the reason we have architects is because they understand the consequences. It is easy for a developer in a absolutist sort of way to say this is the empirical best thing, one size fits all in all situations, whereas the architect, by definition, is bound by constraints, right? Constraints inform architecture. So the cost of building this thing the right way versus this way or that way, maybe in that context, the right way is the cheaper way, even if it has a slight disadvantage of.
It's easy to get caught up in the conversations, so to speak, and it's easy to lose sight of the role. I know that might sound weird, but the well, where do I want to go with that? Sometimes people will come to you and they will say a thing and it seems obvious. So for instance, we have this application and we want it connected into our SSO solution. So that's a very easy conversation. But when I hear someone say that, there's translations that automatically happen in my head. And the translation is like this. The user experience, which is what they're asking for. They didn't say the words, but that's what they're asking for. They're asking for a better user experience, is always inverse of security. So what you're asking me to do is reduce security to trust something like the creation of a token for a better user experience. And so what I end up needing to talk with, the owners of this application or to the company is this appropriate for this application? Like, do we really want to reduce security for user experience in this case? And so you end up needing to translate a lot of things because they don't tell you, that's the hard part, right? Like as a developer, as a software developer, you're like, hey, give me the requirements. And then you just do what the requirements say, so to speak. And in the world of architecture, you're creating the requirements, and the requirements come in the form of non-functional requirements. So someone has to create them, and you are creating them kind of on the fly. And as you go forward with that, you have to translate what's being communicated, and then even maybe retranslate it back out so that they can understand the consequence of what they're asking.
I see.
And then come to terms with that.
Okay. And so you got to be the, I hate to use this term, like the adult in the room sometimes. You have to say no.
Yeah. See, I never say no. What I do is I was like, hey, here's a list of our prime directives, and you just asked me to violate number 3. So then you own this, like you're the owner. Like I don't say no. What I do is I'm like, well, the consequence of what you just asked me to do would put, priority 3 in jeopardy. Do we want a variance for that? Does that make sense for you? Or do we want to reconsider something else? And so I rarely say no. What I do is I put together a story that either aligns, usually, especially when you're talking about business, with dollars or with risk. Those two things are the things that upper management's interested in. So.
Right, exactly. You're the mediator between it's just theory of constraints. There's only so much you can do at some point. You have to balance it by these other things.
We're like the Babel fish that translates risk and money into software.
Translate business into software. Yeah, I like that. Oh, it's just super hard. There's some luminaries in the space, yourself included, of course. Martin Fowler. By the way, I was just thinking about it. You said he popped into your head, and now I'm kind of imagining like a clippy Martin Fowler. Like,
wouldn't that be great?
It looks like you're trying to build an enterprise architecture. Somebody opens up a UML or something. So there's luminaries like
you're using an update in place database. Are you sure you want to do
that? You got yourself. You got Fowler. You got our friend Gregor Holpe, who's enterprise application integration.
I've always been a big fan of Randy Shope.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Right. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah. Formerly of eBay. And
I think he went back. I don't know where he's at now, but at one point he went back. So that's great.
He was also at what's that housing company? The office renting space.
WeWorks.
Wasn't he there for a minute as well? Yeah, he's great, right? Randy Shoop. He's
got a great mind. Over in Europe, who's the other guy? There's it's right on the tip of my. There's a couple of guys that really stand out. That I've seen at some of the conferences. That when you see a conference, you see someone that's hard to tell until you really get to sit down and talk with them. And this guy's. His name will come to me as soon as we're done here. But he's insanely good. Very, very good.
There's a few, but I would argue that just like in real life, just like because by definition there are far more developers than there are architects in the world, right? good architect can scale to many developers and many projects. And then even fewer still that are out there able to give a good transformative talk on the topic, right?
Yeah.
Because translating, as we talked about, translating tech into performance art is hard enough for just software, and
Yep.
and at least that's what I'm told. Good, I wouldn't. Anyway, and then it's even harder still to find a person who's an architect who can then translate that into a fun performance that can resonate with people. So it's, yeah, I mean, that's really hard. That's why I enjoy talking to you, is because you make it, you, without even knowing I've learned something I in fact have. So that's really good. Where would people learn more about this? Do you have a course or something like that? Like
On architecture?
Yeah, I mean, if I went to Google,
I do talk on it occasionally, actually quite a bit. In fact, there's ArchConf coming up in December. I'll be out there. I don't know, there's probably 6 different architecture talks. Some of the things I mentioned will come up there. I have been thinking, what I have to do is review what Mark Richards and Neil put together, because I really do see they do a great job. That's the main point. But I have it on my mind to write an architect's book, like a handbook. And but my issue is I can't just duplicate something that's already out there. I don't care to regurgitate a thing, right? So I don't know what that looks like yet, but I've been thinking through it, but it's more, a lot of times it's taught, I don't know, I have to think through what I mean here exactly, but it's often taught pragmatically or practically. And what I want to get to is more fundamental, or more like, what are the core skills needed to get to this next step? And so as an example, and you gave me a compliment, which I appreciate. I'm not sure I feel the same way, but the ability to abstract is not common, and it's not natural. And in fact, the most common way you teach abstractions, or the ability to abstract, is to show some things that are concrete and then call out the things that are similar, and then say that's an abstraction. But yet we still fail in this all the time, right? Like in software, as a simple example, software, we commonly will have like a dog and a cat and then a cow, and we'll say, well, the common thing behind this is it's an animal. And that is true in one sense, and it's true from a design sense. So there's a very strong difference between designing a thing and then building the implementation of the thing. Nobody in their right mind would actually have an abstraction called animal and then have implementations of a cow and a cat and a dog. So like, we still teach this at a junior varsity, what I call a junior varsity level. And there's like this next level of thinking that's super important. But I still see people all the time do abstractions incorrectly or poorly. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, in software. And I think it's based on how we teach it, but I'm not confident in that. I see it.
Is it
and
because
I'm trying to like, yeah, go ahead.
In the same way that Plato and others talk about the archetype, is it because we reduce to the most common essence and we call that generalization, whereas maybe that's not useful generalization? Like, how do you know when to pull back on the abstraction a bit and say this is actually
sometimes
useful?
Yeah, sometimes we abstract in our language, just like English, right? And it can be useful. It can very much be useful. Like, take a registration system for a university, for instance. I mean, we can talk about students very generically, but there are very different types of students. There's like a part-time student and a full-time student at a minimum. So those are 2 different implementations, but it would be a poor design to have an abstraction as a student and then have 2 implementations, because there's rules, and that's how we started out. Software is all about rules. And so what are the rules for being part-time versus full-time? And if you really think through that, you're like, well, as soon as I go from, say, 9 hours to 12 hours, I've switched. Well, in code, would you really have create a full-time implementation to replace the part-time implementation? And at one point in time in code, you have both, or you killed off the part-time and built a full-time, and at one point there's nothing. And it loses its identity. And the reality is you only have a student, and you have different classifications of students, and that's the right abstraction level. And so, but teaching that and pulling that apart and making that real, it's hard to do. It's easy to talk about something that I've thought about for a long time, like this example I'm giving. It's the same example we gave, in late 90s, so it's easy. It's harder when you have a fresh new problem and you are looking at it for the first time and you're caught in code. That is that time when you want to measure twice and cut once, right?
Yeah.
And it may mean rewriting it in order to get to the right design. And
Yeah.
people, once they get to a working solution, they fight it. They don't want to do it necessarily, but they're also not thinking about the future. They're not thinking about the next extension of a thing. And so, anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, if you had that first poorly designed scenario, when could you actually pass around a student reference and not have to do an instance of? Like you'd probably
Yeah. Anytime you're doing, is this an instance of it? You probably have created
smell.
a poor design.
Yeah. That's a smell. So okay, couldn't agree more. This is the kind of stuff. See, I would buy your book, man. I would definitely buy your book. That would be great. I'd be sign me up to write a 1-paragraph endorsement. Like buy this. I will.
The funny thing is, I got in my mind 2 books to write, and one of them I've been thinking about a lot longer, which is I want to title it "About Time," and it's going to be, if I write it, it'll be about time. I love phrases that have multiple meanings, but that definitely has it. And it would really be, our concept of time is really fascinating. You could get into time dilation, you can get into how we calendar, you can get into, and it involves, the fact that the Earth is a very poor timepiece. And so we've created leap seconds, and why do we have that? We could talk about the first leap second in 2012, which brought down a bunch of websites, Yelp and Foursquare and a bunch of others. Time itself is really a fascinating topic, and I've actually worked on 2 different systems that required the need to get into crons and looking through the time databases, which are stocked with all kinds of hilarious stories. It's worth diving into. Just get in your Linux machine, pull it up. It's great.
TZ info, the TZ info file. That's the same file. Do you remember when former President George W. Bush, he changed the date on which daylight savings time lands? I think.
God, I don't remember that part. But
maybe I got this wrong. It could be. It was so long. Daylight savings time. Clocks were set ahead 1 hour on the second Sunday of March 11th, 2007, instead of the first Sunday of April 2007. So the Energy Policy Act of 2005.
I do remember.
And it caused just chaos because Linux has a file called tzinfo in it that maintains its text file. It's built into every image. And guess what? That was no longer correct, right? You have to update that manually. And it caused havoc around the world, just because of this stupid.
So those would be the kind of stories I'd want, right? Just like with the GPS, a GPS satellite, what people don't realize is that it's far enough away from Earth that its timeline is at a different timeline than Earth timeline. And so you actually have to calculate out the time delay. And when we say time dilation, we don't mean the latency associated with the communication to the satellite itself.
Right.
We mean the skew in time relative to the satellite time versus Earth time. And so it's really awesome stuff.
Time zone. That's a good point. Yeah. Huh. See this? I would read that book. Yeah, it would be good. And you could have as your forward time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana, or whatever it was. The Groucho Marx. My friend, I really appreciate you. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. I got to sit here and just shoot the breeze with you. It's an honor. I know you're busy, and it's just, I'm a big fan. You and I were actually we met each other. We got to see each other for the first time it's been about a year at least since I've seen you.
It's been a long time.
First time in Colorado at Dev2 Next, the amazing Dr. Venkat's shindig. Did you like that show, by the way? I loved it. I thought it was like.
I did love it. I'm used to writing some material and then knowing, I'm going to reuse this material probably multiple times at different conference, or I'll pull from it. And I wrote 2 talks on fitness, on mental health, and on getting fit. And the problem, in part, in my writing it was I wrote it, and in the process of writing it, I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever use this again. And
Oh,
so when you look at it, anyway, yeah, I loved it. We did talk after at dinner, and I when a fitness talk is up against a technical talk, technical people go to the technical talk, even though they may need the fitness talk. And so he's going to realign talks next year to enable people to get some value out of the exercise side of things.
I think that would have been a great talk. You should come on my show again, and you could do that talk as a live stream. That way, it's not lost.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I had one talk on advices from Dr. Huberman, which I've always found insightful, and then another one was just on fitness. So.
That's a great idea. And I think, it's I definitely need to do a better job of minding my health, and I think that's going to become more important than ever in the next.
I should have known this, but I like everybody else during the pandemic probably indulged and grew and was sedentary. And I had one of those moments where I'm like, okay, I got to do something. So I went out and, anyways, I lost 40 pounds and I started exercising most days. And what I discovered is like the body is connected to the mind. Like the thought clarity, the alertness of being able to work, like mentally I was better because my body was better. And it's just this amazing thing. Worth checking out. Yeah.
I would like a nice mind. Okay, I'll try that. I want to. This is maybe I should put that on the old New Year's thing.
Yeah.
We'll talk.
It's coming. Yeah, New Year's is coming.
My friend, are you on the internet? And do you want to be found? And if so, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm easy. Just on Twitter or X, whatever. It's just Ken Sipe. I'm not writing as much there as I in the past. I haven't been writing much on there for years, but I still pay attention. If people ping me there, I'm happy to entertain.
Are you going to do the old Blue Sky?
Blue Sky.
The new social network to which all the nerds have flocked, myself included.
There you go. Look at that. Yeah, that works. There's a bunch of chats coming through that would be correct. And then I do have what is that? That's probably the best one. There's a couple others out there. I haven't been doing as much. Also, Ken Sipe at Gmail. If you have something more long-winded and want to get connected, super easy. It's great being one of the OGs, right? You can actually have your name with no extra numbers or like craziness. Just Ken Sipe
at Gmail.
There you go. Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, the man, the myth, the legend, the amazing Ken Sipe. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you, and thanks everybody. And thanks everybody for hanging out. And bye. Take care of yourselves.
Cheers.